In a candid reflection, Alex Cooper is tracing the contours of her youth back to the potent influence of Taylor Swift, crediting the singer with sculpting one of her most formative eras. She paints a picture of her younger self, headphones plugged in, absorbing Swift's confessional lyrics that felt like secrets shared between friends. These weren't just songs, they were emotional blueprints that gave language to her own adolescent yearning, heartache, and the dizzying rush of first crushes. With a knowing laugh, Cooper even ventures that Swift's music, with its romantic narratives and raw vulnerability, didn't just shape her taste in music, it gently sparked the very beginnings of her sexual awakening. It was through Swift's poetic framing of love and desire that she first began to understand the complexities of attraction, making the pop superstar an unexpected, yet foundational, architect of her coming-of-age journey. The conversation on Owen Thiele's In Your Dreams podcast took a delightfully nostalgic turn when Alex Cooper's gaze drifted from the microphone to the studio wall, landing on a familiar image hanging in the background. There, staring back at her, was the iconic poster for Taylor Swift's Fearless album, featuring the then-teenage superstar with her windswept, golden curls and a glinting guitar. The 31-year-old Call Her Daddy host couldn't help but be pulled out of the present moment, her professional composure momentarily replaced by a wave of personal recognition. That specific image wasn't just a piece of pop memorabilia, it was a direct portal to a specific time in her own life, a tangible artifact of the very era she had recently credited with shaping her. The poster served as a visual trigger, instantly reinforcing her profound connection to Swift's music and prompting a spontaneous, heartfelt comment that bridged her past and present in a single, shared glance across the studio. The atmosphere in the podcast studio was light and charged with camaraderie as Alex Cooper, mid-sentence, began to elaborate on the personal significance of that fearless poster, her voice tinged with the warmth of memory. But before her thought could fully land, her co-host Owen Thiele, ever the sharp-witted provocateur, seized the moment with perfect comedic timing. Cutting her off with a playful glint in his eye, the 29-year-old interjected with the brilliantly pointed joke, "Before you liked girls?" His quip was a direct and mischievous callback to Cooper's own recent revelation about Swift sparking her sexual awakening, instantly reframing the nostalgic album art in a new, cheeky light. The interruption wasn't rude, it was a testament to their rapport, transforming a moment of sincere reflection into a burst of shared laughter, perfectly encapsulating the blend of heartfelt confession and irreverent humor that defines their dynamic. With a self-deprecating laugh that acknowledged the deep truth nestled within Thiele's joke, Cooper seamlessly bridged the gap between humor and heartfelt confession. "We're getting there," she replied, deftly acknowledging the path her awakening had taken before diving into the core of her teenage reality. She painted a picture of her younger self not as a confident protagonist, but as a self-professed loser who found solace and validation in Swift's discography. Taylor became her emotional translator, the crucial connector between her own unspoken feelings and a world that understood them, giving a voice to her silent lament of, "He doesn't love me." In a poignant and somewhat twisted revelation, Cooper admitted she didn't just endure this heartache, she began to romanticize it. She started to believe it was cool when guys turned her down, because their rejection was the very key that unlocked the cathartic, shared misery of a Taylor Swift song, transforming her personal loneliness into a curated, almost artistic, experience of pain. Leaning into the mic with a knowing grin, Owen Thiele distilled Cooper's entire emotional history into a single, perfect thesis. "You were in love with Taylor. Taylor got you through it," he teased, his voice a blend of playful accusation and genuine insight. His words weren't just a punchline, they were the sharp, simple truth that had been shimmering beneath the surface of her entire story. In that moment, he reframed her adolescent devotion, suggesting that the true object of her affection and the real source of her solace wasn't any of the fleeting boys who turned her down, but the constant, empathetic voice in her headphones. It was a comment that acknowledged the complex, intimate relationship between a fan and an artist, where fandom can feel like a form of love and music becomes the most reliable companion, effectively naming the unspoken cornerstone of her coming-of-age saga. Cooper didn't just offer a passing agreement, she wholeheartedly embraced the assertion, leaning into the confession with a refreshing lack of irony. She made no attempt to temper her admiration or downplay the profound role Swift played, instead fully acknowledging how deep that fandom truly ran. For her, it was more than just enjoying the music, It was a foundational relationship where Swift's lyrics functioned as a sacred text, providing the emotional vocabulary she lacked and the narrative framework for her own experiences. This wasn't a casual teenage phase to be chuckled at in hindsight, but a genuine, deep-seated connection that offered validation and a sense of being understood when she felt most alone. Her agreement was a testament to the powerful, almost symbiotic bond that can form between an artist and a listener, solidifying the idea that Taylor Swift wasn't just a singer she liked, she was the essential architect of her emotional landscape during those pivotal, formative years. Later in the conversation, the tone shifted from nostalgic amusement to a more sobering introspection as Cooper reflected on her first romantic encounter with a woman. She was candid about the complicated nature of the experience, immediately clarifying that it happened for all the wrong reasons. It wasn't born from a place of genuine self-discovery or authentic attraction, but rather from a distorted sense of performance and a desire to fit a certain narrative. She hinted at the pressure to conform to an expectation or to craft a compelling story, perhaps even for the sake of her podcast's edgy persona, admitting that the reality of the encounter felt hollow and inauthentic. This confession revealed a painful dissonance. While Taylor Swift's music had provided a genuine soundtrack to her emotional awakening, this tangible step into exploring her sexuality was initially guided by external forces rather than an internal truth, marking it not as a milestone of liberation, but as a lesson in the importance of authenticity that she would only fully understand in retrospect. With a tone of wistful clarity, Cooper pinpointed the tragic core of the high school experience, a sentiment that transcends sexual orientation. It's so sad that, when you're in high school, that's all that matters, the male validation, gay or straight, she observed, highlighting a pervasive system of worth that defined those formative years. She confessed with unsparing honesty that her entire worldview was filtered through this desperate need for approval, admitting, "I was obsessed with these boys and I wanted them to think that it was hot and she wanted them to think it was hot." In this moment, the other girl was not a partner in a shared experience, but a co-conspirator in a performance staged for an audience of boys, their own desires entirely secondary to the overarching goal of being perceived as desirable by the male gaze. It was a poignant admission of how thoroughly that need for validation could eclipse authentic selfhood. The moment was meant to be an intimate exploration, but for Cooper, it was entirely a performance. As she engaged in the kiss with the girl, her focus was completely fractured, her own experience irrelevant. Her attention was strategically diverted, her eyes subtly scanning the male spectators in a crude and desperate search for validation. She admitted with brutal candor that she was still looking at the boys' wieners, actively checking for a physical reaction to confirm that their spectacle was achieving its intended effect. This visceral detail underscored the profound disconnect of the encounter. Her same-sex kiss was not an act of personal desire or identity, but a hollow performance art piece, choreographed for the male gaze and evaluated by its success in arousing the very audience it was designed to please. She anchored the memory in a specific, sensory-rich snapshot. It was Halloween, a night meant for costumes and transformed identities, and hers was on full display. With a self-deprecating laugh, she recalled how her T******s were pushed up to her chin, a physical detail that epitomized the exaggerated, performative femininity of the moment. In that state, a switch flipped in her mind. It was no longer about personal exploration but about executing a role, a mindset she summed up with the phrase, "It's go time." Yet, in a twist that highlights the complex and often contradictory nature of such memories, she conceded with a burst of honest amusement, "Honestly, it was amazing." This final admission acknowledges that even an act driven by inauthentic and disgusting motives could, in the chaotic frenzy of the moment, contain a thrilling, powerful, and ironically enjoyable charge of its own. Transitioning from the raw confession of her teenage behavior, Cooper, now married to Matt Kaplan, used her own cringe-worthy memory as a springboard to analyze the broader cultural pressures imposed on young women. She reflected on how her actions were not born in a vacuum, but were a direct product of an environment that taught women to commodify their own sexuality and seek their worth through the approving gaze of men. Her story of the performative Halloween kiss was no longer just a personal anecdote of embarrassment, but now served as a stark anecdote for a systemic issue, a vivid example of the pick-me mentality that drives young women to see each other as competitors in a race for male attention rather than allies. Her journey to understanding this dynamic allowed her to look back with a sense of clarity and compassion, not just for her younger self, but for all women navigating the complex and often contradictory demands of adolescence. With a tone of wistful clarity, Cooper pinpointed the tragic core of the high school experience, a sentiment that transcends sexual orientation. "It's so sad that, when you're in high school, that's all that matters, the male validation, gay or straight," she observed, highlighting a pervasive system of worth that defined those formative years. She confessed with unsparing honesty that her entire worldview was filtered through this desperate need for approval, admitting, "I was obsessed with these boys and I wanted them to think that it was hot and she wanted them to think it was hot." In this moment, the other girl was not a partner in a shared experience, but a co-conspirator in a performance staged for an audience of boys, their own desires entirely secondary to the overarching goal of being perceived as desirable by the male gaze. It was a poignant admission of how thoroughly that need for validation could eclipse authentic selfhood. This recent heartfelt confession is far from an isolated incident in Cooper's public narrative, but rather the latest chapter in a long-standing pattern of crediting the global pop icon. She has consistently used her platform to praise Swift, not merely for her musical genius but for her profound personal impact, often framing the artist as a foundational and recurring figure in her life story. Whether discussing heartbreak, career milestones, or personal growth, Cooper frequently circles back to Swift's music as a constant touchstone, solidifying a parasocial relationship that has evolved from teenage fandom to a respected, lifelong admiration. This repeated public acknowledgement underscores that for Cooper, Swift's influence is not a fleeting trend but a deeply ingrained and enduring element of her identity. This enduring admiration was further cemented in a 2024 interview with People, where Cooper was tasked with naming her dream podcast guests. Without hesitation, she placed Taylor Swift in the highest echelon of aspirational gets, listing her alongside another cultural titan, Rihanna. This wasn't just a casual name drop, it was a testament to the stature Cooper believes Swift holds, not only in the music industry but as a compelling and insightful voice worthy of a deep, long-form conversation on her platform. To have Swift on Call Her Daddy would represent a full-circle moment of profound significance, a chance to thank the artist who provided the soundtrack to her most vulnerable years and to finally bridge the gap between the private listener and the very public songwriter who made her feel so understood. Her response was immediate and brimming with reverence, leaving no room for ambiguity. "Oh my God, I would say two people, either Ms. Taylor Swift or Rihanna. Period," she declared to People, establishing a tier of her own. Cooper's admiration was rooted not just in their celebrity, but in their monumental achievements as visionary businesswomen. "I feel like those two women have built such incredible empires and I respect both of them so much," she explained, highlighting her deep respect for their strategic minds and cultural impact. Ultimately, it was a desire for a masterclass in legacy building, concluding with the sincere sentiment, "And I would be honored to sit down with either of them." For Cooper, such an interview would be less about a casual chat and more about accessing the wisdom of two of the most formidable architects of modern success.